Right. Okay, so last piece covering organized labor. So what we want to look at is we want to look at the relationship between business and people. One of the things I talked about this morning with my first period class was the fact that the industrial age changes the relationship between people and their jobs. Because before that, I mean, most people were agriculturally minded. And for example, everybody this morning woke up somehow. Very few of you guys woke up with the sun. You know what I'm saying? So when you woke up this morning, it was not because, it got bright out. If you woke up because you had to get somewhere and you had a time schedule. Okay, and that's a modern concept. Okay, that's not something that existed 200 years ago. People were basically were more scheduled, more regimented. Okay. And this behavior started with the need of the concept of time. Factories work on a time schedule. They don't work on, it's sunny out today, okay? They work on a profit motive. They work on the motivation that we have to get something done, and this is the time frame we have. This is the profit I'm going to earn, that kind of stuff. So organized labor started to develop a relationship, labor just started to organize a relationship with the places they worked. Sometimes it became organized. Okay, so let's look at a little bit of the history here. This is actually a really late history. It's not new because this relationship actually started much earlier. Okay, it started actually way back in the Middle Ages when people were building large projects. I'm sure it even started earlier than that. I can imagine that the Pharaoh of Egypt had a relationship with the people that were building tombs and building structures. There always has been a relationship between workers and the people they were working for. But in the modern sense, collective labor or collective organization of workers is nothing new, is what I'm saying. But in the way it is basically looked upon in the modern age, it was kind of new, because unionism, and that's the letter A there, was illegal for a long time. Many governments looked at organized labor as an attempt to kind of subvert the system, and in a way it is. But what's the purpose of unions? Why are they doing that? Why are they making this decision to challenge their employers? Okay, so it's a part of what they call the group philosophy. The group is more powerful than the individual, and for forever the same rules applied. Guys, when you go to work, your biggest complaints all the time are how much I'm making, how long am I working, and what are the conditions, either safe conditions or it could be smelly conditions. It could be cold conditions. What are the conditions of my work? Some people won't do jobs because of the conditions. Okay. Some people refuse to do work because of the hours that they have to work. Is it a late night job? Some people like to work late nights. Okay. So those are the issues that laborers and labor find conflict. Okay, wages, hours, and working conditions. One of the early founders of the union movement was this guy named Samuel Gompers. Really doesn't matter that we spent any time on him, other than the fact that there were early attempts to organize large groups of people. The AFL, the American Farm Labor Movement of 1886, basically helped to organize farmers that were in disagreement with the railroads. I mean, the railroads were undercutting, were basically giving better deals to large manufacturers. But if you were a farmer trying to ship your product around, you were charged a higher price, and they thought that was pretty unfair. So let's move on to that next one. So those are the basics there. So in your questions as you're going along, as you're following that question sheet, pretty simple, isn't it? All right, so there's Samuel Gompers right there. Union jobs mean a better community. Yeah, it can. All right. What kinds of tactics did labor groups use to basically get their way? I guess you can look at it. Well, it depends on the job, right? If we look at different groups of America that have organized labor, probably the most famous of all the groups is probably the Teamsters. They represent truck drivers and dock workers. Teachers unions are many times organized as labor groups. In Utah, there's the American Federation of Teachers. There's that group. There's also there's many others. There's two big ones. That one's one of the groups in Utah. You got farm groups. Mostly it's industrial laborers that unionize. Meat packing groups. People that sports teams, people that are athletics, especially professional athletics, organize in a players association. There's the Major League Baseball Players Association. There's the football, the NFL Football Players Association, and yes, they do strike. Okay, and they work and act collectively. Why? Because the conditions of their working arrangement are difficult. For example, if you look at a professional football player, the average football player, if they do get put on the regular roster, not on the what I would consider to be the practice roster, they undergo I don't know, thousands of hits a year to the head, to the body, and of course the working conditions are harsh. So thus their careers are short. So they want to get paid for it. Okay, you're not gonna ask somebody to bash their head against another person for 5 years and not expect to get some money back. And of course, the process of labor relations is quite complex when it comes to sports teams and sports owners. So what do they do? What kind of tactics can they do if they're not seeing eye to eye with management? One is a slowdown, and like I said, remember it's job related. A slowdown, is that going to affect an NFL team? Probably. I guess you could slow the game down. That's not going to happen. More than likely, that's not the strategy. More than likely, they do a general strike, a walkout. They're just not going to start the season, or they're not going to play a game. Thus, revenues are affected, right? TV revenues, schedules. Could you imagine what it's like on a regular game day of NFL scheduling? What it would be like if all, like the basketball teams did recently, just decide not to play a playoff game. The amount of rescheduling that has to occur. So that's just some ideas. Okay, boycotts are usually done by people used by consumers that support the organized labor groups. So say you feel bad for people that work at Walmart. Okay, you could boycott Walmart. You should not buy it. Usually, fast food restaurant chains have faced boycotts. There's been, for example, I think the last one I can remember is Chick-fil-A got boycotted because of their stance on, as far as they're owned by basically a Christian ownership, a Christian group, and they, because of their stance. People that basically disagree with the hardline stance of Christian groups, for example, gay individuals for a long time, many of them will still not go to Chick-fil-A because of that stance that they take when it comes to gay and lesbian issues. So that's just one of those examples. I hear that from that community because I get privy information. I get information from family members and people that I've known or met that basically live that lifestyle. They basically they voice their opinions on those issues. Let's see. Then you got sit-down strike. Sit-down strikes are basically when you're actively on the job, and you just decide to sit down in the middle of a workflow. Could you imagine what that would be like? Basically, you're working on a Ford plant, and you basically strike right in the middle of production. How much that it would affect the business. So that's what those are meant to do. They're meant to shock the system, and they're meant to send a message to their employers that, hey, we don't like something. And what do they not like? They don't like this stuff. They're either angry about their wage situation, the hours that they work, working conditions, which could include benefits. Hey, we don't get any benefits. Okay, when it comes to like football, baseball players, one of their things is sharing revenues. There's actually some of the revenue that's gained by, for example, jersey sales, shoe sales, and in product endorsements. Some of the players get to share some of the revenues. Also, TV rights and things like that. There's certain things that they don't get to share, okay? And of course, those are things that they're negotiated. So let's look at the next step, management. What do they do if there's a strike, okay? What does management do if there's a general strike or a boycott or any such thing? Okay, well, management tactics can include things like speed ups. You do a slowdown, we're going to do a speed up. We're going to ask you to give more. You're going to have to give more time. You're going to have to make up the production. Okay, that's one thing. Lockouts. This is what has happened when it comes to athletes. One of the worst things that can happen if you're a professional athlete is they lock you out of the facilities. These big organizations like the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers and all the Yankees and all the different other sports groups. You can imagine what the Lakers have for as far as facilities, and you get locked out of those. That can include dining facilities, training facilities, access to coaches. It's a big deal. So lockouts are used many times. You're just locked out. When it comes to the average everyday worker, they just basically shut the factory down and lock you out. They also can do another thing. They can hire scabs. A scab is basically a replacement worker. In the past, scabs have come from many times immigrant groups. So you got to understand that many of these collective bargaining groups, some of them were racially related, meaning that a whole collective bargaining group, a group that was striking workers, many of them could all be Italian or all Irish, okay, and the people that they're going to hire as scabs are from another ethnic group. Okay, instead of racial group, I mean ethnicity. Like Italians, it's like Italians. We don't have jobs, we want to work at the factory. So they basically hire the scab workers, and the scab workers have to do what's called crossing the picket line, which means they have to go by these other people in their neighborhoods that have locked them out. Okay. Or are on strike, and that's very difficult because that's where the violence occurs. Hey, you're taking my job, and then you get the words thrown at each other. So lockouts and scab hiring. The other thing is blacklisting. Blacklisting is just putting you on a list of people that are troublemakers. This person is a troublemaker, and then they distribute that list, and then you don't get jobs anywhere in town. Are blacklists legal? No, they're not. Neither are yellow dog contracts, which are contracts that you would sign as maybe a scab worker, that you're not going to be a thorn in the side of the business. You will promise not to ask for more than we're going to give you, and that's illegal as well. Workers have the right to basically strike. They have the right to complain. It doesn't mean that business has to give them what they want. Okay. So those are some management tactics of striking workers to face striking workers. This next list is pretty interesting because it's a list of things. These are attempts to basically bring two sides together. So now we got two opposing sides, right? And through mediation now, we're going to try to get everybody together. A mediator is just somebody you bring in. They're an interested party or an uninterested party. They have no connection to one or the other side, and all they're going to do is listen to both sides. It's to try to find a middle ground. Okay. And in mediation, a third party suggests a possible way forward. I guess if you look at people that are suffering bad marriage relationships, they go see a priest. A priest can act as a mediator. They can go to a marriage counselor outside of a religious iconology or ideology. They can go to friends. They go to a parents. Usually, parents and friends have a side, but sometimes you just go to somebody that, hey, you know what, this friend of mine, they like us both. So mediation, okay. Mediation is usually if you can solve any disagreement. First of all, you want to solve it yourself. Second of all, mediation is probably your best bet. You get the most out of mediation, and you're still in control. Once you get to arbitration and injunction, you lose control, okay? And that's where you get into divorce lawyers, and you get into counselors that you give power to, which is like power of attorney. So in the case of an arbitration, you hire somebody. You say, here, these are our problems. Problem A, problem B. This is group A, group B. Arbitrator, we're both going to sign a contract, and whatever you decide for us, we are going to abide by. That's arbitration, okay? That's what happens usually when you hire a lawyer. You go to a judge, and the judge is the arbitrator, okay? Usually an arbitration is not official, meaning it's official, but it's not like a court order, which is where you get into injunctions. An injunction is you are so pissed at each other, you can't even sit in the same room. And you got kids, okay? And in the case of business, you've got a business that possibly is in the public interest, like ambulance services. And the ambulance service says, hey, we think your contract is, for a city. Ambulances are contracted to the city, but you need them. We need ambulances, okay? We need people to help people with car accidents and that kind of stuff, okay? So in the case of an ambulance service, and in the case of in the past, we had air traffic controllers, people that basically help us to organize the skies. And you get something that is in the public interest that goes on strike, that's a big problem. So the courts usually come in when they see there's no movement on either side and it's in the public interest. Okay, in the case of a child, okay, like two parents that have dependent children, that's another thing where an injunction will pop in. You never want an injunction when it comes to children because the decision is made by a judge at that point, and both parents might end up not being happy at all, and in the worst case scenario, your kids can be taken away from you. You might lose it. That's kind of in the same case if you go back to the business model again. In the 1980s, the air traffic controllers decided it's a stressful job. They had a really good beef. There were many air traffic controllers that were getting sick. They were getting sick from radiation, from basically sitting in front of a scope. They were getting stressed out. There were suicides. There was mental health issues, and they said we need change. There's a lot of stress, managing the airspace of the United States. It's not easy. So they went to the federal government and they didn't like what they saw and they decided to go on strike. Well, crap, you can't go on strike, guys, because there's 30,000 airplanes that need to get from point A to point B. And this happened. And they threatened. And the president of the United States got involved and he says, hey, we're going to bring the courts in and we're going to get an injunction that is going to prevent you from striking because you can't. It's in the public interest. They argue and argue and argue, and it was also in the public interest because one of the things that the president does is he can create and make executive decisions and make executive orders. Since these air traffic controllers were possibly going to create a safety issue, the president said you've got 24 hours to basically go back to work. If you don't go back to work, the next step will follow. And he fired them. He fired all the air traffic controllers in the United States and replaced them with military people. So he put basically the air traffic system in charge. And those are the people that walked off the job. Not everybody walked off the job and defied the government, okay? So what was his legal standing? An injunction. He had a court order on his side that basically sided with the government, saying you can't do this. Okay. Yes, courts can get involved, even with baseball teams. We found out. Okay. Is baseball and football in the public interest? And they basically many times it's gone to arbitration. Because football is like and baseball like national pastimes. They're not quite at the same level as safety, health and safety. But those are some ideas. Okay, I just wanted to throw those out at you. So mediation, third party suggests. Arbitration, a third party will make a ruling. Because if you sign a contract with an arbitrator, you have to follow it. Because if you don't, there might be an injunction. It could be a court order to follow. They could, the other one of the parties says, hey, you've signed this contract. And of course, the injunction could follow. The courts could step in and go, hey, you must follow what you abided by. It's a contractual issue at that point. Okay, you could argue it, and it could go to court, and it just depends on what the situation is. Okay, so those are some things. It's these three tactics usually worked in favor of management almost every time. Management has the power of influence. Management has the power of money. That would change once we get into the more modern era. Once we get into the 70s and the 60s, where some of these organized labor groups got very large, like the Teamsters. The Teamsters are one of the most powerful, I think they are still the most powerful labor union in the country. The teachers' unions are very powerful as well, as far as organized labor is concerned. All right, moving on. Let's go down to the next little section here. We're almost done here. Yeah, this is some generalizations here. So this is the final stuff. Unions lost most disputes for the reason that I told you. There's more influence in money. Until unions would get enough money to be able to hire the right lawyers to, of course, unions would control large amounts of people that vote, their voting blocks. That also can be an issue, the vote. Violence caused by union memberships to go decline, and of course the violence. Nobody gets a job so they can fight it out. You didn't get a job at a shoe factory to get shot at, okay, or to get beat up with a club. And that's kind of what the factory owners would do. If you basically didn't abide by the rules and you walk off the job and then you prevent them from running their business, they would hire thugs to come in and beat you up. There are people that would be shot and killed, assassinated. There were people that, in one case I was reading the other day, a social activist, he was hanged. And he wasn't African American, he wasn't Hispanic American, he was just a guy that was disagreeing with the business, okay? And whether he was or not, right, shouldn't matter. But it wasn't the usual what we call modus operandi. It wasn't the usual thing. People went and hunted him down and freaking lynched the guy because he stood for something they disagreed with. And they did a little bit of vigilante justice on him. Remember, business has the money. They control the politicians. It was not uncommon for the police to get involved in some of these disagreements, and the police would be paid by the business to come in and rough people up. Okay. Violence, owners definitely dislike unions, and unions many times they resented different immigrant groups that they opposed. Remember, sometimes organized labor represented a specific ethnic or you call it a nativist group, and if you were new to the country, there was a lot of violence geared towards people outside of that group. Okay. So nativism definitely increased as a result. The other issue is socialism. This is also the birth of the relationship between the government and the worker. And socialism and Marxism starts to spawn out of this time period too. You don't see socialism and Marxism at the level that they are in 1900 all the way to about 1920, previous to this time. Okay, you don't. You see, there's definitely socialism going on. I mean, socialism isn't a new idea. The idea of basically people living communally for one single purpose. There was actually experiments done in the textile industry with socialism where a textile owner decided to create a community around his textile mill, and people lived and worked communally for that mill. But the only thing not socialist about it is there wasn't he didn't share in the profits except for paying wages and for labor. So, all right. Anyway, that's those are the notes for this little section. I think there was enough examples there, I'd say, but it's very simple. Remember, it's the relationship between workers and the relationship between industry that's changing at this time, and it's changing drastically. Okay, just think of the idea of the alarm clock. Previous to this time, really alarm clocks were not necessary. People just woke up, they went about their business. People did meet, yeah, we'll meet at lunchtime, whatever that is, okay? Of course, there was a time schedule, but nothing like, if you don't get to work at 9 o'clock, you're going to be fired. And that's the coming of the new labor movement, the new relationship between laborers and their bosses. All right, so that's right there. All right, I got that.